Well, good morning. This is Dorian, they them pronouns. I apologize for poor audio and poor lighting, especially poor grainy lighting. At this point I think, it's got to be my cheap ass just little janky laptop camera thing, cuz here in the real world it's actually a nice warm light, and then it just shows up as so completely much darker on the camera, and I don't know how these things work. Whatever. Um, I wanted to ramble some more about Across the Spiderverse. Um, and just for me, just to get some thoughts out of my head, to think more about maybe what I have learned from other people and other people's thoughts on the movie, because I know my thoughts. I want to hear others and think about the discussion. And I've listened to a whole lot of interesting things in the last couple of days. So I just kind of wanted to ramble out loud to myself to kind of figure out some thoughts, or not figure out, just collect them all together of what are some other perspectives and other thoughts about the movie that I found striking. So, first of all, I went and got the Spider-Punk figurine, and I know, both in jest and in sincerity, that, contributing to capitalism and major, corporations and all that stuff is very, very anti-punk. But, and I'm not normally a figurine purchasing person. Nothing against it, it just hasn't been my bag, but I saw this, I'm like, I have to have it. And the action figure is pretty neat. It's actually surprisingly opposable. I've been able to put him in all sorts of different strumming the guitar positions and stuff like that. So, but anyway, so I was feeling a little bummed for a few reasons of as an adult having a toy, as a white person having an action figure who's black as a toy seemed okay, wait, maybe this is too weird, and then or too inappropriate, and setting that aside, and then just okay, if you really truly love punk rock, you would not go out and purchase an action figure from Hasbro, Disney, whatever. So feeling, and I know that also the little hit of dopamine you get from purchasing something, is conditioned into you, and because you're supposed to contribute to a consumerist society and yada 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 yada. But at the same time, just let me to myself, I'm like, brain, just shut up for half a second. Just let me have a little tiny bit of fun and be a kid for a moment. But one thing I will say that made me feel a little better was I was just blithely, window shopping on Etsy for action figure accessories, and I found some really cool things because I've always been into miniatures, and so all kinds of things you can think of to make set dressing, little tiny wooden pallets in miniature, or oil drum cans, or dumpsters, and just goes on and on and on, the creativity that people have of creating miniature set things. So I was randomly looking for action figure accessories, and then Marvel, and then Spider-Man accessories, and then on Etsy I found at least two different makers of a 3D printed sculpture of Hobie's head. And it was sold unpainted, and it was sold painted, and oh my god, the art was gorgeous and beautiful, and you would think it was, specifically commissioned by Hasbro or whatever, but it was, it's just, I think it's just some, regular ordinary person selling it on Etsy. And then I thought, a DIY individual person on their own, making their own 3D sculpted face of Hobie. So then you could go around and pop the heads off of other action figures and stick Hobie's face on it, so that Hobie Brown can be wearing any costume you can think of. You can pop his head on any Spider-Man action figure, or you could pop his head on any action figure that would fit. So he could be in other superheroes' costumes, and so you could put Hobie, a black person, in any costume, and then by de facto, so one individual DIY making their own art so that you can pop the heads off the official action figures and stick this head on it so that a black character could be any superhero you could think of, as it should be. Okay, that's a little punk rock, and that made me feel a little bit better about purchasing the action figure. But okay, two Across the Spiderverse and some more thoughts I've had about it, and then if any of those thoughts have made any of my opinions change or be more eye-opening in that regard. So first to cite sources, like who have I been listening to, and I need to look up, all the names of people, but FD Signifire and Bellamy Rhea and Aranock and Jessie Gender and Tirrrb, I believe, was the group who I was listening to do like a live discussion yesterday evening about Across the Spiderverse. Like left to right, it was like Aranock, Bellamy Rhea, FD Signifire, Jessie Gender, and Tirrrb. Yeah, that was that group yesterday. And then the group I listened to the day before that was an FD Signifier group that had FD Signifier and Tirrrb, and Bellamy Rhea was there in the chat for sure, and moderating, and then there were several other people in that group, but I unfortunately didn't know them. I can't remember their names, but it appeared to be like a all black group to have a more all black discussion, or black centric, I should say, discussion about the movie. And so 2 days ago I was listening to like a black centric, Black Voices discussion about Across the Spiderverse, like that included Tirrrb, I think it's Tirrrb, yeah, Tirrrb and FD Signifier and Bellamy Rhea and one group there. And then yesterday I listened to another discussion which kind of felt like a part two to that discussion that had some of those same people from like the black and black queer community with some of the people from like the white queer community. So it was sort of like the first discussion I was listening to was like a lot of voices, like a lot of different black voices' thoughts about Across the Spiderverse. And then the other discussion I was listening to was kind of a mixture of like some black and black queer thoughts about the movie and some white queer thoughts about the movie, and like it's sort of almost like two separate but similar discussions, or two separate but similar communities who have had, and far be it for me to speak for anybody else, but I'm just trying to sum up kind of my takeaways from the discussions, like this kind of black community and queer community, which don't have to be and shouldn't be distinct. And obviously there are black queer people, but that maybe there can be tensions between the groups, and this isn't my first rodeo of hearing about infighting among like leftist groups or infighting among marginalized groups, because my general sense of things is, divide and conquer, and that the people in power who are trying to stay in power, the rich white cishet European colonialistic white supremacists, oligarchic emperors, to stay in power, you keep the peasants divided amongst themselves and fighting each other, so that they don't unify together and bring out the guillotine and depose the people in power. And, you keep your populace scattered and divided and fighting amongst each other, and it's so much easier to hate than it is to love, and different groups do and there are legitimate reasons, like white people and even white people, like white progressive people, have always sadly put black people down to further their own cause. Like it's you know, it's hard, like if you know anything about the women's suffrage movement in the United States, and you know, if you go to school, you might learn about, you know, these women voting heroes, and was it like Alice Paul, and like how great they are, and what you, and even like I watched, and it's fictional, but I watched the Timeless TV show, which is like my favorite TV show, one of my favorite TV shows, and it is progressive enough to center in its main cast a woman lead and a black man co-lead. Of the three co-leads of the cast, it's a black man, a white woman, and a white man. And one of the points of that show, I think, is to tell stories in history that don't get told in the textbooks, and to highlight people, particularly women, particularly black people, particularly who have gotten overlooked in history, and so on and so forth. Like Bass Reeves, who's like probably my all-time coolest person of all time. They did a phenomenal, like, Bass Reeves episode. I'm getting way off track. Anyway, even in that show that was trying to be progressive and with that bent to give voice to, like, non-white men lead roles and historical figures and that such, even then, when they did, like, a women's suffragette episode, it kind of did depict, you know, the suffering white woman as you know, great, awesome, and a hero, and depicting her more one-dimensionally and more like the history books have depicted her. But then if you know more, if you dig deeper, like, you know, while she did a lot of things for white women to vote, she did a lot of things to keep black women from voting, you know. And my gist of how my general Cliff Notes gist of like the women's suffrage thing is that black women started the you know, the let's get women voting club. My brain, I'm so tired. But yeah, anyway, they started it, and then white women joined in, and then it was appearing that, you know, they weren't going to get enough support to get women to vote, because in these fucked up systems of oppression, you have to get your oppressors to vote to give you power, because you don't have power. And you know how fucked up that is. It's like you have to get, you know, the slave owners to give the slaves the right to be, like, anyway. But so they weren't gonna get the votes from, like, the southern women. Oh no, not the southern white plantation owning women. But that was the deal, was that the white suffragettes literally kicked the black women out of their own club and threw them under the bus so that they could align with the white southern plantation-y women, so that, because they thought, well, better we get something rather than nothing at all, and this is the only way we're going to get something. When no, what it should have been was votes for everyone or nothing, and not have done that, but that's what happened. And again, as people more clever and more aware have pointed out too, that the queer white community has thrown the queer black community under the bus time and time and time again, and people of color, and to advance rights, you know, for, like, white queer, but not, and so on and so forth. And, like, when I attended the women's march protest, and, you know, inauguration protest, you know, I went to the protest on, you know, January 20th in DC, like the inauguration protest, which was not the Women's March movement. And then the next day I went to the Women's March movement, and you could tell different vibes even then, where it was trying to be much more inclusive. And it was trying to be an inclusive movement of, like, it wasn't just white women, and it was trying to say, it was trying to teach and spread, like, intersectionality. Like, we're not just fighting for women's rights, we're fighting for black people and Muslims, and, we're fighting for undocumented workers, we're fighting for everybody, and, it's freedom for everybody. But even so, see, I was unaware of it being white, but I would find out later just how, like, white and how exclusionary, I guess, it felt for the initial Women's March protest, and they were saying that it was focusing predominantly on, like, white female voices and being white-centric and being led by white women, and wasn't being inclusive, even though I was getting the sense that it felt inclusive. And maybe that's because I was in a protest in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, which I have heard is pretty damn diverse. And so you look out among the sea of people, and it felt pretty intersectional. And for me, it felt like it was teaching me really, like, the concept of that word. But I listened and heard, and I joined a hub afterward, so that it's not just a march, it's a movement and having discussions. But even again, in the hub that I joined, it was almost all white. It was like, it was like 6 white women, 1 white man who was a husband of a white woman, and 1 black woman. And she would later run for office, and I canvassed for her to try to help her run for office, and then she got screwed over because the guy, her Republican opponent, was pulling shenanigans which were cruel, and anyway. But anyway, having all these discussions and realizing that it was too white woman dominated, and then so they wanted to retool and see how can we do better. And so they I know I'm not talking about Spiderverse anymore, but I just letting my brain go where it will to try to contemplate these topics. So anyway, so then that would end with, that would lead to a conference in Detroit that I attended. But again, I was only able to attend because a wealthy white woman could help afford me to go. Otherwise, as a poor person, I would have never had that opportunity. But attending and being aware of the, like, socioeconomic, like, class, like, rich and poor divide and everything like that, because how much can wealthy people, even if they're running movements, speak to wealthy, privileged people, speak to the needs of poor people, and even, you need more representation. Anyway, so at the conference in Detroit, there were tons and tons, and one of the focuses was intersectionality, and there were tons of, like, lectures on how can we learn from this, and how can we do better, and how can we be, not be so white-led, and what can we do to make the Women's March movement much, much, much more inclusive. And so there were panels on diversity, there were panels on, like, I went to a disability panel, I went to an indigenous panel, and they're talking about how rights for one are rights for all. Like, for example, with the disability panel, like, if you've ever just been walking down the street on the sidewalk, and you know that, like, dip where the concrete, like, dips down so that you can, like, roll your stroller, like, down the street, or you can roll your shopping cart or what have you, or just easily more step down in the street, just where the concrete dips down. You can thank a disabled person for that. Disabled people had to fight to get those in there so that you could, get your walker or your wheelchair, up onto the sidewalk. So if you ever are moving around, and you find those convenient, thank a disabled person. And to get some of these rights, you know what they had to do? They, like, a bunch, you know, what was over a thousand, and it was in the 90s. Like, they crawled because they couldn't walk, you know, out of their wheelchair and, like, crawled up the steps in DC to demand rights as the police are pulling them down, pulling disabled people, like, down the steps who are trying to crawl. Like, it's fucking brutal, and this was, like, the 90s, and that's how we got some amount of disability rights. It's, like, and, you know, if you are not disabled, you would not even be aware of that undercurrent of suffering that runs. So it's, like, rights for one or rights for all. And I attended a panel because, like, one of the things, yes, okay, the pink pussy hats, right? Pink pussy hats. And again, if you're white, you can be oblivious and not maliciously so, but, like, pink pussy hats. I had one, you know, and, you know, I thought it was cool and people are wearing them. But fast forward to later, was it a year later? You know, when I'm at the convention in Detroit, I attended a panel called, you know, Not All Women Have Pussies and Not All Pussies Are Pink. And so just from the title alone, you can see, oh, well, that was a huge misstep and oversight with that, because the movement was led by white women who had no fucking clue that they were being exclusive, and or maybe they did or historically have, you know. And so you know, I attended that panel discussion, like, on transgender rights. And then there was another panel that I wanted to go to. I wanted to go to so many, you know, and the main one that I wanted to go to was one on, like, how white people can shut up and pass the mic. And obviously I'm not doing a very good job of shutting up, because no one needs to hear one more white voice in the crowd. But it was like, how can white people do better and learn to do better? It was a panel on that, and I couldn't attend it because it had packed up, filled up, and was, like, standing room only, and then, like, lines out the door, and, like, it was a huge hall. And by the time I physically even got over there, like, I didn't have a chance. And they said, you know, they would get a anyway. So, but let me rein it back in, and try to get back to Spidey and Spidey people, and just what I've been. So in the vein of thinking about, like, how white people can co-opt black movements and, like, step over black people, and the miscommunications between the two groups, between multiple groups, and how multiple groups can be, like, weaponized against each other, because racism and bigotry is just taught in society, and it's taught from multiple angles in multiple places, you know. And so you can be empathetic to some things and not empathetic to other things, or, you know. And then there's religion and politics. It's a big jumbled mess. And like I said earlier, of, like, I think in some general sense it behooves people in power to make sure that the peasants, and when I say peasants, I just mean, you know, I think of it kind of like in medieval or, like, feudal times, where, like, there's only one kind of feudal lord, and then there's just everybody else. But, like, this idea of, like, keep your populace divided amongst itself, and divide and conquer, so that they don't unite and support each other and have a French Revolution type situation. But anyway, so back to the movie. Where do I even want to focus? Where do I want to start? What are some things that I heard? Okay, so it's like, where does my brain want to go with this? What are some things that I heard in the discussions and stuff from the last couple days that were completely new to me, that I didn't even realize pertaining to the movie? Interesting stuff that I thought was really cool, or things that might have changed my mind about stuff, or whatever. Maybe just go beat by beat through the movie. I don't know. Maybe I think I'm gonna link to that second discussion with Aranock, because Aranock had some really, really cool in-depth theories, and I can tell that she, like, she's probably gonna put out an amazing, like, video essay on it, so, you know, full credit to her. She had all these thoughts about, like in the beginning of the movie when it says, you know, approved by the Comics Code. I know of the Hays Code, and that, you know, it banned, you know, LGBT content and, like, you know, McCarthyism and all that stuff. I knew about that, and that you had to follow certain rules to, like, get that sticker on the comics, and that, you know, it meant things that, like, if you did bad stuff, then you had to die by the end. So we got into these tropes of, like, villains always have to die, and, like, all kinds of stuff. So, but when I saw it in the opening sequence of Into, and in the opening sequence of Across, you know, my words for the movies, I didn't really think anything of it, because I just thought it was there to add some, like, comic-y flavor to the movies, like, because, like, maybe, you know, it looks like a page one type deal. I didn't really think anything of it, but Aranock has all these theories about that, and her theory is that they're in, like, part 3, it's gonna start with that, but then, like, have it crossed off to be like, hey, we're going to go off book here, and all the stuff that you said was banned and couldn't be done, and these, you know, like, gay people can't exist, for example, we're going to say loud and proud, you know, fuck you. So that's right in the beginning. And then the next thing was when I was, like, rambling in my last thingy, and I read into like a transgender theme in the movie, and I don't know if I was as big on connecting the transgenderness specifically to Gwen. I'd have to rewatch my rant that I said, and, you know, it's my words, so I should know, but, like, I don't know if I was specifically connecting it to Gwen as much as I was thinking about transgender as a theme in general across the movie, because I was talking a lot about the colors of blue, white, and pink, and how they were used, and how they were even used in Into the Spiderverse, with the scene with, you know, Father Jeff Morales and son Miles, and Jeff is on one side of the door, and Miles is in his, like, dorm room on the other side of the door, and the background behind Mr. Morales is white and pink, and then the background behind Miles in his dorm room is more blue, and you have those colors there, and so it's a muted transgender flag color in a scene with two black people who I don't know if anybody codes either of them as transgender or queer or anything, and I saw that. And I saw that as rhyming with what would be that reflected parallel scene in Across, when now it's the father is Mr. Stacy and the daughter is Gwen, with, you know, the father on the left side of the screen and Gwen on the right side of the screen, and you can't miss the transgender flag colors there. So, okay, I guess I want to compare and contrast my views of the transgender themes in the movie with what I think other people were picking up on. But I just want to say this and get this out of the way. When about the name Jefferson Davis and my thoughts with it. So before I even, you know, made my video the other day, like right before I did it, you know, because it's just live, it's just me rambling, but right before I did it, I had gone on my phone and I tried to, like, look up, like, a credit casting of everybody, and I wanted to get, like, everybody, but I didn't go to, like, IMDb, because I was very, very, very tired. It was, like, way past my bedtime, and I wanted something with pictures. I wanted, like, a picture of the face with the name, and I found, like, 2 or 3 websites and trying to get as many names as possible, and again, I'm not very comic book literate, and I don't know a lot of these things, so a lot of my takes are just what I'm getting from the movies, right? And so when I'm going through the credits, because I'm trying to find out who everybody is, like, because when I was in me trying to figure out who everybody is, it starts with me in the movie theater. It starts with me in the movie theater, and even though I knew that there would be, like, no end credit screen, I like to stay all the way to the end anyway, to be respectful of the credits, and also because I've always done this even before the end credit thing from Disney Marvel. I mean, that kind of made it official that I would wait to the end of the movie. But even way before end credits, I would wait to the end of the movie because I'm into music and I want to always see what the credits are for the music. And the music's always at the end. But I at least, so anyway, it starts with I'm watching the credits in the theater and I see Brian Tyree Henry. And I'm like, ooh, Brian Tyree Henry is in this? Who does he play? And then I'm waiting to see his name when the credits roll at the end of the movie. But I didn't catch it because, it goes by really fast. And then so when, then I watch the movie again and I'm looking for the credits again. And I'm like, oh, he's the dad. But I forget how it was credited in the movie at the end of the movie, but I'm like, oh, he's the dad. So I'll have to see when the movie comes out, how is it actually credited in the movie? Like, what does it say Brian Tyree Henry plays? Because when I went online, and again, maybe I just should have gone to IMDb. Maybe I should go to IMDb right now to see what, the official one says. But in the different websites that I went to, the credits were inconsistent. Like, it was very, very hard to find all of the voice actors and specifically saying what voice actor played what part. Like, if you want to find out, who voices this bit character and this bit character. And, so it was kind of difficult to get, credits. And then even a main character, because I wanted to do who played Rio, the mom, even she is credited slightly differently in different places, as some places as, I believe it's Lauren Velez, and then other places as Luna Lauren Velez. And then some people, aren't credited. And then, I was trying to figure out, okay, at the end of the movie, when you have the wife of Peter B. Parker, at the end of the second movie, the one who has the baby, that one, who plays that character, because I think in my other video, I cited two different names, it was Zoe Kravitz, I think, and I'm blanking on the other one, but I came across two, so it was hard to, the crediting inconsistencies, and that could be kind of intentional if companies aren't giving, crediting the fair share that it's due, but anyway, long story short to that, when I was looking for who plays who, who does Brian Tyree Henry play, it said Jefferson Davis. And when I saw that, on my phone, I'm like, the fuck? That's a Confederate. Why the hell? I was, I was confused. But then I thought, maybe because I'm white, well, that's got to be unintentional, like a John Smith kind of thing, but that, I'm just confused. So then I think, when I saw that, and then I immediately, turned the camera on and did my whole ranty rant. And you can see in I think that I didn't even address the fact that I was aware that Jefferson Davis was a Confederate name, which I was, and I just thought, oh, well, that's odd. But confusion, I think, was more my main point, was I don't understand, because if you just watch the movies, and so that's the thing, I think, as I assumed, it had to be a comics thing, it had to be from the comics, and so, because if you watch the movies, chronologically, I believe, Into the Spiderverse, the character of Miles' dad, the character of Miles' dad is referred to as Jefferson, and Jeff again, and I think that's it, but possibly Mr. Morales or Lieutenant Morales. I want to say last name is mentioned as Morales out loud in the first movie, but I'm not sure. But I know he is mentioned as Jefferson and Jeff, and then mentioned as Jeff again. In Across, he is very, very clearly on multiple occasions referred to with the last name of Morales. and I think referred to as Jeff. And I cannot remember, even though I saw the movie twice, I cannot remember if he's referred to as Jefferson out loud in the second movie or just Jeff. But he was referred to as Jefferson out loud in the first movie, so, like, canon. So I fully believe that in the movies, this character's name is Jefferson Morales, like Lieutenant Jefferson Morales, and maybe is called Jefferson by his wife, and called Jeff by most people, Jeff Morales. And so, I believe that that's probably just always been his name, as that it is implying to me, knowing nothing else. And what I imagine probably really happened, or like I think what other people have been saying, is that in the comics, the character's name is Jefferson Davis. And so they changed it maybe for these movies to Jefferson Morales because of the unfortunate name. But see, I have so many questions, that I would have to look up about that, of like when did they change it and why, and did they change it just for the movies, or was it changed in the comics beforehand, and why was that name ever chosen in the first place, and is it canon in the comics that the character's name was Jefferson Davis and then he met Rio Morales and then he changed his name to his wife's last name, or did the comics do something like a parallel universe, or like are we just saying, in the comics world, which is separate from movie world, like we know with like the MCU, the comics and the MCU are different things. In the comics world, it's Jefferson Davis, and then in the movie world, it's just Jefferson Morales and always was Jefferson Morales. I don't know. But why, in the first place, would you name a black character Jefferson Davis? Why? And then two, why in the movies where the character's name has been changed, why would it be credited as Jefferson Davis? So anyway, if someone was doing that accidentally, that's a hell of a oversight. Again, maybe white people writing black characters, or maybe it was done intentionally because they wanted you to think about it and they wanted to generate the discussion and they wanted to talk about like how black people often have the actual names of their oppressors and how like traumatic that is and how you have to like repurpose it or find your own identity or something. So I wanted to mention that a little bit further, and I'm going to pause to get a sip of water. Okay, so I mentioned about Jefferson Morales thing. Okay, so more thoughts about the movie. Okay, because I kind of lost track here. All right. Oh, okay. So I think one of the things I wanted to talk about was what were some perspectives that I learned from listening to some of the discussions within the black community about the movie. And then what were some thoughts I heard from other, like, white queer people and about the movie. And also non-white queer, or, whatever, just, the kind of black community thoughts about the movie, and maybe queer transgender thoughts about the community, and then maybe the intersection of those, or the conflict of those, or takeaways, or what have you. So one of the things that was being talked about in the first FD Signifire Tirrrb black community group was a lot of discussion about like cops and propaganda that I thought was interesting, and again, stuff that I would maybe not have, I certainly do not have the perspective to have thought about, or thought about in different ways. Like for me, I didn't think too much about Lieutenant Morales being a cop, because I just thought that the coppiness of it all was just part of the archetype of telling a Spider-Man story. I guess because it has to rhyme. Like, I know that Miles Morales is not Peter Parker, and that you're showing how, very much so, how Miles Morales is not Peter Parker. But at the same time, before you can show Miles doing his own thing and being unique, you have to connect him to Spider-Man in the first place, to show that he is Spider-Man, and you can do that by connecting on similar tropes. Like, you know, what is the generic plot of, you know, a Spider-Man, which is part of what Across the Spiderverse is trying to say. What is the basic mythology of, like, you know, if there's a kid, is it always, you know, necessarily, you know, a male kid? Because is this an analogy specific to that? And the kid has to be a teenager, and then the kid is bitten by a spider, and then the kid is always associated with the lower socioeconomic class, and there's always that story of balancing, like, school and work, and superhero, and, you know, personal life and superhero life. There's that dichotomy. There's also like fighting for the working class, and like your local neighborhood, like fighting bank robbers. You know, not Spider-Man's not out fighting, I don't know, like cosmic giant. You know, it's, I don't know. You know, what are the beat by beat moments? And maybe one of the beat by beat moments is the Uncle Ben moment. You have to have the Uncle Ben moment, where a character who, you know, is a relative has to be fridged in order to promote the growth of the main character. And so maybe part of what the movie was doing was saying, like, if this is the script of this is the archetype that you have to stick to have a Spider-Man story, what parts of that do we want to keep as essential and as canon, and as, you know, enough of it so that you can recognize the Spidey of it all, and how much of that do we just want to smash up and say no, that doesn't have to be canon, and we can explode that all to shit. And so one of the themes is, I guess, you know, the idea being like, does Uncle Ben have to die? You know, and so, and it would be a bit unfair too for Miles Morales to lose his dad, as they're also implying, or as they are leading towards, because he already had his Uncle Ben moment with Uncle Aaron. So why would he have two? But anyway, so back to the cops. So I guess I just thought that the reason there were cops in the movie was just because there were cops before, like in the other stories. That's like a theme, you know, with I don't know, whatever. But I was just like, but Uncle Ben's not a cop. So that doesn't necessarily it doesn't have to be true that Peter Parker's relatives have to be cops either. So maybe that was but MJ's parents weren't cops. Because MJ, I don't know. There's no cop-centric themes in the Tobey Maguire, are there? Or are they there and I just miss it? So I don't know. But maybe they are. Either way, I didn't think anything of it too much, because I was just thinking, well, the reason that Miles' dad is a cop is because, you know, it's a cop theme. And they were making that statement in the movie that in order to be a spider person, you have to have a theme with, like Gwen Stacy's dad, or you have to have a theme with a captain, a police captain dying, and that has to be a theme, like that's a canon event. And so, because plot demands, I guess. But see, the idea that Miles Morales' dad could be a cop, what I'm sensing is that, obviously that is a very sensitive subject of, why would you be a cop as a black person? And, the very, very complicated nature of that discussion, which obviously I am not able to, have the perspective to really comment on. But just listening of how painful it is to see that Miles's dad would be a cop, and I guess the only, it's, I don't know, if I were to speculate, a lot of people take jobs that they hate or jobs that are oppressive because it is the only job available to them. A lot of people take things out of kind of like an inheritance, like, well, I'm a cop because my dad was a cop, because a lot of people, I think, go into trying to, be a good person, and be like, I'm going to be the exception to the rule, or, I'm going to beat the system from within. And if you go back to Bass Reeves, speaking of, what was Bass Reeves's deal? I think that, so the general gist, and I'm probably wrong, but here's how I understand it with Bass Reeves, is that he was a slave who, I think he was forced to fight in the Confederacy, and then I'm not sure I don't think he was granted freedom. I think he ran away. I'm not sure if he was officially freed or not, but he escaped into what was called Indian Territory and lived amongst indigenous people, and then he became a sheriff. And he's essentially the Lone Ranger. He's essentially what the entire Lone Ranger story is based off of, where they whitewashed it all, and they made his sidekick a mockery of Spanish-speaking and indigenous people, and called him a nickname idiot, and they made the Lone Ranger white, and whitewashed it over and erased it completely. No surprise there, and so no one knew that the Lone Ranger was black, and but he was an amazing sheriff, and he brought so many people to justice, and no one knows his story. And well, they're gonna make a movie. I've heard they're gonna make a movie or a TV show or something. But anyway, and that he never killed anybody except one, I think, or two, because that was his thing, was he wasn't going to kill anybody, and the only reason that the people ended up dead, I think it was, a nasty thing that was in self-defense. And then this guy was so freaking moral that, he had to bring his own, that came out wrong, but yeah, he was so ethical that he brought his own son to justice. Oh my God. This, you can definitely map Lieutenant Morales on a it fits. Like a black male cop, and then having to point a gun on his own son, and the conflict therein, and arresting the son and bringing the son to justice because he's doing the ethical thing. I mean, that story is there. That story existed. That's Bass Reeves. He's awesome. He's awesome. So anyway, why did he become a cop? And they have a little bit of that discussion in the Timeless episode, they discuss that, where Rufus, the other black male lead, is having this discussion with Bass Reeves, in the fictional TV show, and being like, how can you literally work for the people who, like, not the literal people who enslaved you, but how can you work for their systems, and how can you work for their law? And then his character is responding with this, like, very, kind of sort of lofty ethical stance of, like, because good must be done, or, but also I think, the way they were playing it in the TV show was more along the lines of, like, if he didn't stand up for the indigenous people, who would? Because the white people wouldn't, obviously. And so, maybe he essentially became a sheriff to be able to serve the underserved. And I think that maybe historically happened, where he was put on outposts that they would not put the white officers, and or like maybe he was assigned to Indian territory, or, again, I have to get the specific details, but I don't know. So anyway, I don't have any cops in my family that I know of, but I know people who wanted to be cops or had cops in their I don't know any cops directly. I just knew someone who wanted to be a cop, and he wanted to be a cop, to do good in the world, because he wants to be good and do good, and he never became a cop, which is why he's a good person. But yeah, like, I lived in a town where there was a huge cop to populace ratio, because you had, like, the local cops and the state cops and the highway cops and the like, cop training school, and it was in a relatively small town, so you had a huge cop to person ratio. And it's like, I am sure that a lot of people go into it because they want to do good, and they want to be kind, and they want to help people. I guess to which I would say, be a fireman. Not that I can I'm sure there's, a lot of, obviously a lot of, like, white supremacy and stuff embedded in there too, but there's other ways to help people too. I mean, my understanding is that with the police force, that it was created specifically to oppress black people. That's how it was created in America. That was the purpose for its existence. That how did it all start? Way back when you had, like, militia groups of people running around, a bunch of, like, I don't know, Zimmerman types, or, farmers or whatever, and that they would get recruited, maybe because they knew the layout of the land, and because they knew how to fire guns, and, whatever, they were warm bodies, would be, like, recruited to capture runaway slaves and return them, and, extra points if you beat them up, or, whatever. And then that, I guess, was the basis for the foundation of police force, because eventually I think these random citizens were like, here, you're official now, and then I guess they were just made the, like, slave catching squad, and then that evolved into, and it's just, it's, that, how do the kids say it? It's not a bug, it's a feature. That's why they were built, and that's the point behind the thing. And you can, it was very, very blatantly fucking obvious, like, during 2020 and everything, where, I wonder if 2020 was where a lot of white people, like, finally realized, oh shit, but it shouldn't take, it shouldn't take that long for people to realize. I don't know, it's just, to compare and contrast, when you have, like, a bunch of peaceful protesters who are peaceful trying to protest, and they're met with rows and rows and rows and rows of cops and riot gear and shields and fucking tanks and like all the backup, national, every fucking person for the peaceful protesters, for a group of people who are made up of like, liberals, white liberals, and people of color who are peaceful. You bring in the tanks and the riot gear and layers and layers and layers of cops. And for people who are like, MAGA protesters, who the citizenry is armed and wearing armor and shields and weapons, they're just able to just waltz right up to the front door with like not a cop in sight, or barely any. They're like two, and they're like, hey, come right in. Like, it's blatantly obvious who is allowed to protest in this country and who isn't, and so on and so forth, and whose side the cops are on. And you can see, that cops are actually members of like white supremacist groups and riot groups, and that shouldn't or doesn't surprise most people. Like, and like, it's just, yeah. And also when people say the Apple phrase, oh, it's just a few bad apples, fuck that phrase. I'm gonna get all sorts of, this will be ripped right off YouTube, but what do I care? I'm nobody. That's the beauty of being nobody. Being white, you can say whatever you want, but also being nobody, you can say whatever you want. But it's just like the apples phrase, right? Oh, it's just a few bad apples misunderstands the phrase. If I'm not mistaken, the phrase is a few bad apples ruins the whole bunch. But even that is just, it's an inappropriate metaphor, because it's assuming that the system is fine and there's just a few flawed people, which we should all know is incorrect. Yeah, there are individuals who are racist. Yeah, there are individuals who are bigoted. Yeah, there are individuals who choose to do bad and evil and horrible things. But, obviously there are multiple kinds of racism, and it's not just individual racism, it's systemic oppression. And so to even say the phrase bad apple implies that there's nothing wrong with the system and it's just a couple of people, when the whole scaffolding is designed in that way. And so when you try to talk to people who, particularly, cishet white men, who seem to fundamentally misunderstand concepts of racism and concepts of white privilege, and like, it's because I think they're thinking of individual racism rather than systemic racism, and it's on some level are refusing to see, or choosing to refuse to see, not only the rot within the system, but that the system was designed that way, that every system was designed that way. That where people live was by design. Who has access to what is by design. But anyway, back to the cop thing within Spider-Man. So again, there's many reasons why someone would be a cop, but I'm guessing that one of the thought could be, well, this is the best way that you can, so back to Spider-Man. As a meta commentary, maybe the reason that Jeff Morales is a cop is because plot demands, or, rhyming with, like, the Spider-Man story as a meta thing. But within the canon, or like within movie, why would Jeff Morales, the person, if he existed, be a cop? And you could speculate a lot of things, like his age and generation. Maybe his family had a lot of cops in it. Maybe, it's a proud cop family. Maybe he wants to be the change from within. Maybe, it's the best way that he can to provide for his family. Maybe, he saw his brother Aaron go down a different path, and there's like a dichotomy between the two, and so, maybe he chose to go hardcore towards the system in reaction to seeing his brother go hard toward against the system. I'm not saying that right, but like to in a meta way to show the dichotomy, but how would it justify the characters? But like I could see that, because like I've seen families where, like, one sibling goes really, really hard one way, so the other sibling goes really hard the other way. Like, one sibling, drops out of high school and, like, hangs out with quote-unquote the wrong crowd and, like, maybe gets into a lot of trouble and, like, is constantly, like, having all these issues. And so the other sibling, like, maybe because that's happening to, like, the older sibling, goes hardcore the other way and, like, becomes, like, like a clergyman or, like, a cop or, like, I don't know, a teacher or, like, so that, like, I was just thinking in my family, it's more like religious based, like one like rejected religion, the other one went like hardcore into religion because maybe the sibling went in that direction, and or vice versa, or like I don't know, there could be a million reasons why Jeff could become a cop. The point is he is one, and the point is it is unsettling, and I seem to think that there's more consensus. I'm guessing that there might be more consensus that it would be more acceptable if Jeff Morales quit and didn't be a cop and didn't support, these systems of oppression, as opposed to, stay within it and try to be the change from within. And, like, far be it from me to weigh in. It's just like, I do think that for your soul, you should probably quit, because there's just so many forces that could drag your soul down into being unkind. And there are other occupations where it might be kinder for your soul. But, far be it for me to say. But at the same time, just in a philosophical sense, like, if all non-white people didn't become cops, then that would make the problem worse. Not that it is incumbent upon non-white people to fix cops either. So I don't know. How do you square that? Well, get rid of it and build a different structure that serves different purposes to different ends. But anyway, but in the meantime, I guess you'd have to try to fix the system from within. So, it's complicated. But see, I'm coming at this from a completely different perspective, and a perspective I don't have the perspective to be able to weigh in on that. The point is, I was hearing that, it was a major bone of contention of, like, that he was a cop. So that, and then furthermore to that point, propaganda. Like, we all know that the MCU is propaganda, and, like, their deal, the military industrial complex and their deal and all that stuff. But this is Sony, not Disney, so they might have some more leeway. And so I guess the idea was, like, is the movie propaganda? Is it not propaganda? And so having a discussion about that. And it's hard to say. I mean, Gwen Stacy's father quits, and that is praised in the movie as a good decision. And then there is that line of that that Gwen says to her dad of, you became a cop so that someone who shouldn't have this won't. So there is that. Anyway, I've been rambling for like an hour and I'm getting nowhere. So, let me think about how I want to maybe put a pin in this concept. To sum it all up, what is the movie trying to say about cops? That would be the question. If I was to categorize this thought. What is Into the Spiderverse and Across the Spiderverse? What are those movies trying to say about cops? And what is the theme? And so that is one theme of the movies. I don't have any conclusions. I'm just putting that out there. What are these movies trying to say about cops? To further explore that thought later. I really, really like these movies because I like how much conversation they are generating. For me, personally, probably fairly obviously, is that I like to overthink things, and I like to philosophize, and I like to ramble, and I really like to overthink and get into all these philosophical meanderings about movies and topics and all sorts of stuff. And, me being me, I can probably just do that with just about anything. But even so, some movies are hollow enough that even me, who could ramble forever, like, okay, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, I made a little YouTube-y ranty thing about it, and I don't know how long I ramble. I ramble forever, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, infinity. I rambled about that D&D movie. But, it didn't really get me thinking on deep philosophical levels, because it's just kind of a pop song, a little one-hit wonder. It's nice, it's good, but it doesn't really get the juices flowing. And I feel like some of the best movies, or not just movies, the best pieces of art are the ones that really get the conversation going. That doesn't necessarily mean, I was going to say good art, but don't take that the wrong way, because Spiderverse is spectacular. I was just thinking the best pieces of art, period. That doesn't mean good or bad or pretty or ugly, just best, are the ones I think that really get your mind going. Well, I have a really great anecdote, but it takes me way off point anyway. But the point is, I'll set that aside, but just about art, about what is seen as good art and bad art, and how this one piece of art that I saw once that I thought was just, that's nothing, that's horrible, and then that turns out to be the only thing I remember from that art museum to this day, because that shitty little thing, well, yeah, I'm just saying the anecdote anyway, so I'll say the anecdote anyway. So at one point I was in Mexico, I forget where, and I was going into an art museum, like not a big, it is a really small thing, it was like a kind of like a one room thing somewhere, and to go see the exhibition, little pieces of art on the wall, little tags under them, say what they are, kind of a small thing. But anyway, I'm coming in and going down the stairs, and then on the wall that is presented as art, and it's got the little card under it with the title and everything, and it's tacked onto the wall. And I don't think it was framed. I think it's just, tacked onto the wall. But it had a little card with the art, with the title and everything. So it was one of the pieces of art. It was like a piece of notebook paper, like lined notebook paper, like on there, and like with like red scribbles and ink on it, and like scribbly things. And I was really young at the time, and even I like abstract art, and I like Salvador Dali, and I like I can get into things like Dadaism and all kinds of stuff. But even I was like, that's not art. Like, I could do that. That's not art. And then this other person next to me was like, yeah, that's art. That's da-da-da-da. And then for like an hour, we were having this big discussion about art. And then to this day, because that was... I think it was 20 years ago, because it was 2005. It was 2005, so almost 20 years ago. To this day, the only piece of art that I remember from that show, because we eventually got down the stairs, got into the room, walked around the room, looked at all the art in the room. I don't remember any of that. In fact, there's whole swaths of my whole time that I was in Mexico that I don't remember, but I remember that squiggly paper. It changed my mind completely. Like, it is art. Obviously, it was art. That one little thing generated more discussion than almost any other piece that I'd ever seen hanging on a wall in an art gallery, like, ever. And so, fuck yeah, it's art. So punk is art. Like, it's obviously punk, but that was a hard segue. Like, but like in the music world, the equivalent would be like distinguishing between like what is music and what is noise. And that whole big segues has entirely different discussions. But so bring it back to Spiderverse, of like what I really enjoy about Across and Into is that they generate a lot of thought for me, but that's very easy to do. But even I can tell when something is bad, like Thor Love and Thunder was kind of like my recent movie equivalent of that scriggly paper, kind of, except it wasn't, I don't know if it was that clever, but this idea of sometimes a bad movie can really, really get my thoughts flowing, because the bad movie could like let me think about like, well, why was it so horrible, and what is good storytelling, and what is effective storytelling, but it's not going to get you really thinking about. Like, good stories will get you thinking about larger concepts, like concepts about, love or kindness or oppression, and I also think, so I really like that Across the Spider-Verse is like generating all these discussions. It has meat on its bones. It has a lot of layers of a lot of different reads that you could take on it. People are seeing themselves in this movie, and people are mapping onto it in different ways, and it has so many different layers of themes, which I find really interesting. So backing away from the cop thing, because I think I've said all I can say on that for now, and I'm not nuanced enough or have the perspective enough to really get into that. So I'm going to close that off for the moment. But just, the layers of themes, of topics in this movie that are all done consistently well. I think that I think it was Bellamy Rhea saying that they like mirrors, like holding up mirrors that people can get to be, reflecting themselves in, or forcing them to think more about themselves. I'm not gonna go further because I I don't want to misrepresent their take, their concept. But like, my thought was like, sometimes a good protagonist in a movie is a blank slate, like say maybe, I don't know, Neo in the Matrix or something. Somebody who's a good blank slate so that a lot of different people can read he, him, themselves, and see themselves in that character and be brought into that world and connect with that character. And, your protagonist is someone who's often the way for the audience to come in. Someone who's unaware of the situation and then has to be drawn into the situation and learn about it together. And so and mostly those protagonists are, cishet white male, type deal. Like, but people can still try to map themselves onto that character, through having no choice. But like, say like, you have Superman and you have Frodo and you have, and so on. Like with Frodo, like some people could read into it that maybe Frodo and Sam were gay, and then they could have that representation that they wanted to see themselves into the character, even if it wasn't there expressly, or even if it wasn't there intentionally, or even if it was hinted at. And people who, because of white supremacy and colonialism and everything, since all of the protagonists are always the cishet white male, then other people are forced to look for codes and hints and signals or mapping onto to see something that isn't there, because they want to see it, because they want to have that representation. Like with Spock, I think Spock in Star Trek can represent for a lot of people like maybe being neurodivergent, or like Kirk and Spock could have represented for a lot of people gay, like a gay subtext, and so on and so forth. And then with the Hays Code and everything, where people had to be like wink wink nudge nudge and in code, because you weren't allowed to expressly show these things, then you develop like movie codes and things that certain communities are keyed into to look into. But everybody is just hoping one day to have express upfront representation, so that you don't have to go looking for it, so that it doesn't have to be hidden, and it's just upfront. And like, for example, the Our Flag Means Death show, I think, is like truly representative for maybe some black folks and indigenous and non-white and non-binary and transgender and trans-mask folks. I think that Our Flag Means Death is like truly representative, and Taika Waititi is out there, putting his life out there to give like authentic indigenous representation, and then the importance of T'Challa and Black Panther, and giving real voice and representation. And because so often movies are about trauma, like black trauma, made by white people for white people, so that white people can feel better about themselves. And like for example, like was it Green Book? Like, I saw Green Book and I liked Green Book, but it's like I wanted the hold on, I need to look up his name, the character's name. I forgot both of their names, but the pianist, Donald Shirley, Dr. Donald Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali. So I just felt myself thinking that I wanted to know more about, Dr. Shirley, and less about, like, his cab driver that one night. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, here, Shirley, I was raised, like on classical music and never heard of him because racism, and so why haven't I heard of him? And like this guy was amazing of like, you know, he had like the wealth and the privilege, and like he didn't have to go touring in the South. He didn't have to, like some people had to and got, you know, life kicked the shit out of him, like, you know, Robert Johnson, and like they have to go crawling through it and like locked out of concert halls and like not allowed to play, like whereas like, you know, Elvis had the privilege to be there, and like, you know, and but like Shirley didn't have to do that, but he chose to like, you know, bring culture in their faces and like fight the system and like be badass, and like he didn't have to, but he did. And as not only as a black man but as a gay black man to choose to go to the South to like, you know, be awesome. And it's just, but the movie doesn't center on Shirley though, because it centers on like the white dude, because again, you know, I guess the concept of the movie is not so much here's this really awesome person who you should learn about, who's really cool and really awesome, and then also you know, show that person like being like showing the rewards of their life and like being cool and like getting acclaim and like being awesome, instead of just showing like their trauma, right, and like the worst moments of their lives, and like their suffering, like that is, you know, it's suffering to be gay, and then like it's suffering to be black, and and instead the center of the movie is like, I don't know, this like white cab driver who's racist, and then he has to meet an exception. Okay, sorry, I guess I'm talking about how much I love / now hate the Green Book movie, and that's where this rant is going. Like, it's like the point now of the movie is like that this white guy has to like learn a racism. It's like, and I'm no saint, but you know, so I'm all learning too. But it's just like, it's like The Help. I don't like the movie The Help at all, so I'm not going to talk about that movie. But again, it's just like this idea of like I'm getting madder and madder and madder and madder, so I'm like, I need to calm down, because there's layers and layers and layers and layers of white people exploiting black people for white people, like on this like Inception level, because it's like, okay, it's like you have the white cab driver who's the point of the movie is that he's the protagonist of the movie and he's racist, and then he has to meet a really really cool black guy and a really really cool gay guy, so and he has to see that guy get tortured and in pain so that he can learn, hey, maybe, just maybe, black people and our gay people aren't so bad, yay. And then so he learned a racism, you know, by meeting like a really really good one, you know. And that, but the movie should have been like a biopic about Dr. Shirley and how fucking awesome Shirley is, and maybe not center on black pain, but center on, you know, like black excellence and how awesome he was and all the other like really cool stuff he did in his life, you know, instead of just tack on at the end of the movie in like one paragraph like, and goes on to do da 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 or whatever, you know, like make that the focal point. But no, because why was the movie made? The movie was probably made as, you know, Oscar bait. And Oscar bait seems to be code for, you know, let's have white people exploit black people so that other white people can feel good about themselves and then self-congratulatory and then pat each other on the backs and then give each other Oscars for it, and not give the Oscars to the black actors but to the white people who had to learn a racism. It's like, it's layers of fucked upness, you know. And so anyway, like, I haven't seen Wakanda Forever yet because I don't know, I'm not in the mood, you know. So but it's just like, I understand that like with Black Panther, you're celebrating black excellence and black joy and like good things, positive things, things that you rarely get to see, like unfortunately, like a black man being alive, a black man, being a good, well, we still didn't really get to see it because, T'Chaka was killed, and but the idea, like, what are the things that you don't get to see? You don't get to see like a black man like being a good father or a good husband or a good leader or a good anything, or like you don't get to see like people being happy and same thing with the queer community. It's like so many of the stories, you got Philadelphia and Boys Don't Cry and Dallas Buyers Club and so on, and like Bury Your Gays, so on and so on. Like the point of these movies is we have to show people suffering and in pain because we have to show people suffering and in pain. And like Tom Hanks did a great job, but like in that, Philadelphia is a good movie, but still it's just like, and you have to have like straight characters play queer characters, or you have to have and even then you have to have a movie about how the person who's bigoted learns to not be bigoted through the person who's suffering, and then the person who's suffering and their pain and their death, is as service to the protagonist who is not the marginalized person, but then learns the lesson, and then the entire point of that is for other people to like feel good about themselves, But why can't you just make things where black people or queer people or disabled people or indigenous people, whomever, like Our Flag Means Death, why can't you just make stories where people are just exist and are happy and are just doing their thing? And so I think that was why Star Trek was so like good for people, was to just show people just in their daily lives just being science officers. I mean, people will get into like, because they're part of the military and da-da-da. But I'm talking about, the utopian nature of like the original, and like with, TOS, and then also with, Strange New Worlds, maybe. I don't know, I don't want to get into it too much, but the idea of just like, people just exist and are who they are, and you just accept everybody, and you don't have to have stories that focus on the trauma. And then if you are focusing on the trauma, like, are you doing that to like support the cause, or are you doing that because you want to like win an Oscar, or you want to exploit the pain, or it's long and complicated. So back anyway, Spider-Man. Oh, brain. So where do I want to go with this? So I think part of the things from maybe like the black community, part of the discussions were focusing on like cop themes, and then they were focusing on like the relationship or potential relationship between Miles and Gwen. So this is this discussion of like the relationship of Miles and Gwen, and that was unsettling for a lot of reasons, and it's very complicated. And then a lot of praise. I think everybody has a lot of praise for Rio and for the conversation that Rio had with Miles. So I guess to get into this topic, which is a pretty, I guess, dicey topic with a lot of hard feelings about it, but to see if I can like understand it best I can. Some people might be saying like, black people and white people shouldn't date, but that's not really what they're saying. I think I understand the concept is like, if you enter into a relationship, like, like, okay, if you're a white girl and you're gonna like date a black guy, first of all, do it because this is a person who you love, not because of like some kind of fucked up fetishy exoticism or tokenism, or like, hey, look at me, I dated a black guy, right? Obviously, just, it should be, just genuine, like anything. Like, and that goes for anything. Like, you shouldn't be like, oh, I want to date a trans person because then I can, I have a fetish for trans people. Like, whatever. Like, anything should just be, just because you like that person. But then, and this is a bad analogy because I think they did it poorly, but it's just the first thing that pops into my brain. Like in Downton Abbey, when they introduced the relationship between Rose and the jazz singer, like that was atrocious, the whole thing. But it states to the point of like there's all these. There's a long history of black-white tension, and specifically, like, if we're talking in heterosexual, like, black male, white woman tension, or portrayal, or, there's a long history of, white women, Emmett Till, and, like, just, like, more so than in other dynamics of, like, say, black women with white men and stuff like that. But, like, so there's some, I guess, hard baggage when you have a depiction of a relationship of, like, a black man and a white woman to begin with, of, like, some society, like that we're conditioned to be societally uncomfortable with it, or I don't know, that people, part of it is that the idea of the white woman has to know what she's taking on, or learn what she's taking on, and like be committed to it, and be committed to really and truly being an ally, and being able to, face the discrimination as an ally and know what you're taking on. Like, know that if you, like, if I don't know, if a situation happens, like you get a burglary or something in your house, or I don't know, you can't find your wallet or something, you don't just go call the cops. Like, you have to have more awareness. And the thing that made me think of it, just coming from, like, my perspective of, like, for example, there's a couple who I know of who, high school sweethearts, and got married, and the couple is, one cisgender woman, and one assigned male at birth person. And, I don't know them well. I don't know if, when they got together in high school, or at what point the one partner came out to the cisgendered person. But the point being that, like, for all intents and appearances, they would appear in public as a heterosexual couple, and then at some point, her husband, came out as transgender, and is now her wife. And some couples, would have to navigate that, and some couples don't survive that. Sometimes the, like, cisgendered and or heterosexual partner, that might be too much for them to handle, and maybe, a divorce does happen. But one would hope, in the best case scenario, even if, like, say you are, cisgendered and you're straight, and then your partner comes out to you, hopefully that, you love them no matter what, and you're committed to this, but now you have to essentially become queer, because now you might be seen in public as, like, so in this couple, the this one woman, the cisgendered spouse, that she now would be perceived as a lesbian. Now, she herself might not identify as a lesbian. She herself might identify as straight, but in public, she's going to be seen as a lesbian. She's going to be treated as a lesbian for all intents and purposes, or whatnot. So then she is becoming queer in some sense of the form, and so she's going to have to be willing to take that on, and and facing it in new ways that she hadn't before, that she maybe hadn't thought of, being maybe cisgendered or straight. So things of that nature, of being aware of that and cognizant of that. Another thing I think with Spiderverse is that I think, again, what I'm hearing is that what people are really saying is they want more representation. Where are the black women? Where are the black women? And again, we shouldn't have one character in service of another character, of why, if you have this character, then that means it somehow detracts from another character, and the idea being why can't we have both? Why can't we have white queer stories and non-white queer stories, and why can't we have black stories and Afro-Latino stories, and Puerto Rican stories, and why can't we have it all? We should have it all, and one shouldn't be in service of the other. And so we shouldn't be well, if we see an Afro-Latino person, be yeah, but why can't they be fully black? Maybe it's because deep down, it's because there just isn't enough representation out there. We don't have enough black superheroes. They keep killing them off. We don't have enough black female superheroes. They keep killing them off. Or having them off screen, or having them off in some sideshow. All the female people of color are on Disney Plus, deep in the archives, or whatever. It's just so I think it's these things can divide the communities against each other, and lean into intergroup bigotries and things. But at the end of the day, in a perfect world, we should have more representation for everybody. And also, you could also say that a lot of times you get, again, white women instead of black women, like I was saying, or on purpose even, or white queer people instead of non-white queer people. Where's the non-white queer representation? So why does Gwen have to be white? Or I guess you could say, by making Gwen white, it could be her learning. But then again, we're back to that whole, do we need more movies about how white people have to learn? Again, I think what we're seeing with Black Panther and Across the Spiderverse and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I haven't seen RRR yet, but I need to see RRR, and Crazy Rich Asians, and Our Flag Means Death. And I think what we're seeing is that if you let people truly have representation all across the board, so not just in front of the camera, it has to be behind the camera. We need to have female people of color cinematographers and directors and screenwriters and And so when you truly have representation all across the board, I think we were having with Everything Everywhere at Once and Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians and Our Flag Means Death and Across the Spiderverse, it shows. And then when people can tell more authentic stories, then the characters are going to feel more three-dimensional because they are more three-dimensional, and they're going to give broader perspectives, and they're going to appeal to broader audiences, and people will be able to map themselves onto the characters better and be able to find themselves in the characters better. So whether you're black and or queer and or disabled and or indigenous and or Pav Patar being Indian, or somebody mapped onto this one character that I barely even noticed other than a gag throwaway line, but like this disabled character, like she really mapped onto. Like when representation is there, and it's authentic, then obviously the storytelling is just so much better, and people, why wouldn't you do it? It's just a win-win-win-win-win. People are happier, the storytelling is better, the storytelling is richer and more authentic, you get more perspectives, you get more complex three-dimensional characters, you get layers of topics of conversation, and we don't need to fit some old stodgy, colonialistic model anyway. So, I don't know. Random thoughts and stuff. So, okay. Basic themes and concepts. We had the cop theme, the relationship theme between Miles and Gwen, and that can be uncomfortable, and that maybe, we've seen too many white women and white queer people overshadowing or intentionally overshadowing non-white women and non-white queer people who should be made center stage, and so that's part of the discussion. And another part of the discussion is just, for example, you have Jessica Drew. I think a lot of people were saying that one of the weaker parts of Across the Spiderverse was how thin Jessica Drew's character is. She's badass, but she's badass in a very, very blink and you miss it shorthand, because the movie doesn't have time to give her character dimensionality. So we do a shorthand for her being cool by giving her really cool look, really cool glasses, motorcycle, and she's pregnant. So badassery implied, but we know nothing about her character. And so, and I think it's coming down the pike. We're going to get a Spider-Women movie. So I'm thinking that it's probably going to focus on Jess Drew, her, I'm hoping that she's going to be the protagonist, but it could be, but again, see, you really need a Jess Drew movie and you need a Gwen Stacy movie, but then it would also be nice to flesh out, like I'm sure they could have, a Penny, anime that they're making, but again, then you're putting the Asian woman off on a sideshow, right? So it's so if they make a Spider-Woman movie that has all these characters together, as an ensemble, done well, but then, so I don't know, but that's speculation, but it's down the pike. You have these characters to play with, and you have Jess Drew, who should be fleshed out more dimensionally. But they had Rio in the movie as a woman of color, and some people were mapping onto her as Afro-Latina, and some people were mapping onto her as Puerto Rican. But then again, it does feel weird. Again, these discussions of how Puerto Rican is she? How black is she? And if you're getting, what is that whole blood theory? That whole mestizo thing of that's just layers and layers of more racism, and maybe me being white, maybe there's a lot more context between, Afro and Hispanic diaspora, tensions that I am missing that I can't speak to. Suffice to say that, I know that that whole, percentage thing was also taught to us by society, or maybe, I don't know. But anyway, I think that, in any case, Rio is a woman of color, and she's front and center stage in the movie, and she makes the movie, and, she is there to have complexity and depth of character, and so that's good for representation. Because, again, I think I said, in Marvel, they're not doing such a great job, killing Ajax and I didn't see it, but I heard that, like, isn't in Wakanda Forever, like, aren't the Mesoamerican people, like, portrayed? They're, at least in the, since I haven't seen it, I don't know, and maybe they're flipping the script, but, like, from the trailer, it appears that the introduction of the first, like, Mesoamerican superhero is portrayed as an antagonist, is portrayed as the villain to Wakanda. But, anyway, you have America Chavez, who's in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, so she's really interesting. And so, for speaking of, like, a person of color and also, like, queer pride, but, but again, she's not exactly... Well, she is a main character. I don't know. Circle back to her later. I don't know. Whatever. Back to Spiderverse, though. So yeah, I think at the heart of it, people just want more representation. Oh, and then to get to the point that Gwen Stacy also is not, like, she's not doing perfect, good, happy things. Like, she's fucking up, and she needs to learn, and she needs to wisen up and do better, basically, is also a consensus. And yeah, to that I say, like, yeah, hold on, let me get a sip of water. But okay, so meandering thoughts on this. I think the next chapter of my thoughts is going to be on, okay, how does Gwen Stacy need to do better, and shifting over to talking about Gwen Stacy here. Okay, so Gwen Stacy. So I have my own thoughts about Gwen Stacy, my own headcanons, and I got really, I don't know, trippy with it, but I have my own, like, elaborate theory about Gwen Stacy, and I was, like, kind of, trying to chat about the movie with some coworkers, some other people, and no one was kind of, like, the people who had seen it, no one was kind of, like, thinking along the same lines I was, and I haven't watched, like, Jessie Gender's video on the movie yet, but I don't know if I haven't heard anybody thinking along the same lines as me. So, like, I think I was just picking up on things that are just nothing. But I like to way overthink things. So I have my own pet theories about Gwen Stacy, but so I think I'm coming at Gwen Stacy from a different perspective, entirely. Because I'm thinking that what we're seeing in the movies is not the whole picture, that we're being misled to some degree. But so if I can step out of my brain of how I see the character and try to think about what did I pick up from what other people were saying. That's the whole point of this, is listening, of, like, how were other people interpreting this character. And when I kind of am hearing it from their perspective, it does make her seem like worse and worse and worse and worse. But also some things that I hadn't picked up on before. Like I said, there when I was thinking about transgender issues in Across the Spiderverse, I think I was thinking in broader terms, like the movie as a whole as a metaphor. And its usage of color and things like that. But I was picking up on some transgender vibes that Gwen could be transgender, but I hadn't thought all the way through, like, all the coding of it. And, like, so Aranock was laying that down, and, like, as she was pointing it out, it's like, oh. There's even more explicit, heavily codedness to Gwen Stacy being pretty clear cut that she's trans. that she's a trans woman specifically, or gender fluid, or, femme presenting. And, like, Aranock was going into a whole thing of, like, even to the point of, like, when and how she shows her body, of, like, when Gwen is, like, putting, like, kind of baggier clothes on, like, say, around Miles' parents, to when Gwen is, like, showing off, like, her body more and, like, her feminine form more, like, around friends that she's comfortable with, and, like, obviously, I mapped onto the scene in the beginning with the montage of showing all the different hairstyles and hair colors and hair things like that. It does seem very much, again, with Spider-Man and the metaphor for puberty in general, which is something that I thought was, like, very clear with, like, Tobey Maguire, strange things are happening to your teenager and you can't control your body, and your body is doing weird physical things that are weird and confusing and you can't control. And then, like, how do you learn to, like, it's a metaphor for puberty. And, like, also, but with Gwen Stacy, and people were pointing out that Gwen Stacy and moods and colors and things, and the connection between colors and moods. And so I still have yet to go back and watch Across the Spiderverse a third time, but one of the things I want to look for, just from an art visual perspective, is what a lot of people are talking about with colors, of, like, that different colors represent different moods and things. And that you can kind of, and so there's all sorts of nuance to the phrase when Miles said, "Your hair is looking pinker." I did catch up on some elements of that, like, that I touched on, of, like, if pink represents happy and she's happier, but then also, if you're mapping on as trans, and that's showing her progression from more masculine to more feminine presenting throughout the course of time, and things of that nature. But anyway, so, what are more, like, I guess what I'm saying is, what are the more, well, first of all the ways in which you can really see more of that trans kind of story there, of, like coming out to her father and things of that nature. But and being rejected by her father and finding a found family, and that kind of elements of, like, queer experience of, like, being rejected by your family and trying to find a found family and all that kind of thing. Setting that aside, moving on to, like, all the negative things that people are saying, or some not the undue ones, the ones that I think to be dignified with a remark, like the nice thing, what are things that about Gwen Stacy, that why is Gwen Stacy bothering some people, apart or in addition to, like, what I've already said about the complexities of, like, interracial dynamics, and, like, why aren't more, like, just black couples shown in movies and such, but instead of, like, heavily featuring, like, anyway, moving on to Gwen, so that she's basically, I think it boils down to that she's not being a good friend to Miles, is what it boils down to. I think the summation of the whole dialogue is that she's not being a good friend to Miles. I guess the reason that this didn't bug me as much as maybe it should have, and I don't want to make, like, excuses or anything, that's not what I'm trying to do here, is that my headcanon is kind of like Gwen Stacy's been the villain all along kind of thing. So it's sort of like, if I'm looking at Gwen from that perspective, then I'm like, well, of course she's a shitty friend to Miles, because she's not really his friend, because we don't know the whole story, because, like, my headcanon, but I want, like I said, I want to step outside of my head to see, because I don't want to be blind to what they're saying, of, like, but, like, my headcanon is sort of like, she's, like, I don't know, like Terminator, like, she's sent back from the future to, like, target Miles and take Miles out, but that in doing so, she falls for the guy, and so now she's conflicted, and then her arc is that she has to, like, be like, I've had a change of heart, and now I'm gonna switch sides, but we haven't seen that yet, because, you know, the movie ended where she's still the antagonist. She's still out to get Miles, you know. So again, I wasn't surprised that people were saying that she was a shitty friend, because I'm like, that, I guess that wasn't exactly my read on it. But okay, now trying to step outside of my head, if you take the straightforward perspective that she, you know, is not time traveling and all that other stuff I said, that she, you know, she got sucked into the universe, she had spider powers, she went into another universe, and she met Miles, and they started to become friends, and then she went back home, and she felt alone, and she missed her buddy, and she missed her friend, and she kind of liked him too, but she didn't want to allow herself to have feelings for him, because the map of the story that she learned from her buddies is every time Gwen Stacy falls for Peter Parker, she dies, and in every universe, Gwen Stacy dies, and so her universe is the only, you know, she's fridged for the development of Peter Parker's story, and so what makes her special is that she's the only Gwen Stacy that survived, and so she's thinking that maybe she survived by not falling for Spider-Man, and so she's not allowing herself to have feelings for him. And so then when she has to go into that universe again in Across the Spider-Verse, she misses him and she wants to see him, so she pops in to see him and say hi, even though she's not supposed to, and she's not supposed to get too close. And again, there's that whole question of whose side is she really on here, and she's not supposed to get too close, but it's like, is she going to be a friend of Miles, or is she going to, you know, do what the bad people, you know, or I don't want to say the bad people, but like, do, you know, there's a conflict. That's the conflict, is that obviously Miguel and Jess Drew are not on Miles's side here, you know, and although you could say the real villain is Kingpin, but anyway. So which side is Gwen on and everything? So what are the things that Gwen did bad? Well, she's not being honest with Miles, and she is betraying him a lot. Like, she's lying to him. You know, she's lying to him a lot. You know, she's lying, she could be lying like in my head canon, she's lying the entire time she met him, but at least from like Across the Spider-Verse, you know, she's lying to protect him, of like keeping him from knowing about the Spider HQ, because like if he, you know, maybe she's telling herself that like it'll protect him, or it'll keep him safe, or you know, whatever. So she, you know, and she's lying about how long she knew about, you know, this plot to, you know, that he's the anomaly, and you know, she's actively antagonistic to Miles. So I guess part of me was just confused as to, oh, were we supposed to think that she was his? I don't know, it's complicated. But anyway, how do we want to see Gwen Stacy's arc resolved? I think what people want to see for Gwen Stacy's arc is she has to learn and do better, and she has to take a side, and she has to take Miles' side and stand with Miles more concretely against the oppression. Like, you could see at all points in time, Hobie was always on Miles' side. I mean, everybody loves Hobie. There's nobody who doesn't love Hobie. Like, everybody loves Hobie. But like, Hobie is always unequivocally on Miles's side. You know, Hobie by very nature is anti-establishment and is never going to take the establishment side. And then so I guess the other bit is like Miguel O'Hara, and somebody was making the connection between like O'Hara and Irish, and Gwen Stacy's dad is Irish, I believe. Irish cop, I think, right? So, or something, and like Irishness and cops, or at least in American society, you know, Irish cop connection. And but then, you know, mapping Miguel O'Hara, the villain, the antagonist, you know, with the Irish cop theme, even, you know, as a Spider-Man, but then Hispanic and stuff about that, was a conversation about that. But we don't know the whole story with Miguel either, because, I mean, he's like some kind of vampire cyborg from the future thing. But, I mean, anyway, so, I don't know where I was going with all the, you know, to tie it all up together. Gwen Stacy obviously needs to be a friend to Miles and learn to do better, and, you know, not lie and come around and be on his side, and not, you know, if you're going to support somebody, then you don't support them, you know, no half measures. You actually support them, I think, is the point with that, to tie that up in a bow. Okay, so any other overarching thoughts about all of that? Yeah, now I'm kind of going brain dead with it all. But yeah, very lots of layers to the movie, where it's talking about identity and authenticity and being your true self, and who are, you know, what does society want you to be, and what is the script, what is the literal script, you know, with the metaphor, with the, you know, the counselor at the school with the piece of paper, like, stick to the script. You know, what is the script that society wants you to play, or that oppression has dictated you into, of that you have to be a certain way or not be a certain way, or show one face in public and one in private. And, like, there's all sorts of meditations on those themes. There's also meditations on, like spot and privilege and feeling entitled to privilege. People were saying, like, I think, you know, the group that I mentioned earlier were saying, I think it might have been Bellamy or Tirrrb, or I can't remember who generated the thought, but they were talking about Spot, the villain, of being representation of, like, that kind of white male privilege of, like, you have everything, and then a roll of the dice, you lose it, and then feeling like, well, I have to have it back, and then, like, lashing out with rage, like, give it to me, like, why don't I have it, kind of thinking. I guess where my thoughts were going more was Spot, was the don't kick a man when he's down kind of thing, of, like, if only he had been shown compassion and empathy when he was down on his luck. Like, yeah, you know, life can pull the rug out from under you. You could have everything, and then there could be a wildfire, and then you're homeless and you have nothing. You could, you know, lose your job or not be able to find an adequate job, and then you have nothing. Like, no matter what, like, you do always have privileges. Like, I had a friend of mine in the past would say, like, not only is there a glass ceiling, there's a glass floor. Like, there's only so far you can fall if you're a white person, you know, or, like, you know, white and passing as female person, or white and passing as male person. Like, there's only so far you can fall too. But anybody can fall. And then, so with Spot specifically, you had a little bit of the Thing analogy where he's like, I can't go anywhere. I can't show my face in public. I can't get a job like this. I can't go anywhere looking like this. And so someone who, like with the Thing, like a white person now trapped in essentially like a non-white body, or like a marginalized body, like facing discrimination for the first time and not having any kind of community to help him understand that and understand that that is what's going on. And, you know, again, if the movie was in service of Spot from like a Spot-centric point of view, but it's not. They have to have a villain, and so, you know, I concede to suspension of disbelief, or, you know, for the plot demands to have a villain, because Spot's going to be fun because of that multiversal power, you know, not unlike, you know, the TVA being able to pop in everywhere, or like Wanda as a Nexus being, or Kang with, you know, like, it'll be interesting to see the multiversal power thing. But, because you have to have a villain. But if you think about it, like, if it had gone another way, if Spot had been met with community and kindness instead, if someone had said, hey, there's nothing wrong with you, what's wrong is with what's happening here is that society is rejecting you solely on the basis of what you look like. That's what's going on. Have some kinship to it. Here, join our community of X-Men. Join our community of, you know, join the resistance against the people who are bigots, and let's make a better society. That, you know, and we live in a world that has all sorts of superheroes and all sorts of things going on, so why couldn't Spot have just been a regular member of society and gotten those basic needs met right away? But he wasn't getting those basic needs met. He was down on his luck, and then it comes to, like, don't kick a man when he's down. Like, don't kick someone when... Not that it's Miles' fault, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, I think that that's where Spot is coming from, of, like, when you have nothing else and you're down to, you know, you have nothing, what do they say, like, don't, you know, fear a man who has nothing left to lose, and you got nothing else. And so here he is, like, in Spot's mind, like, here he is, like, in a very, very low moment in his life, you know, trying to steal from an ATM, and, like, this, well, I explained, I don't need to say it again, because I already said it, whatever, but, like, I had more empathy, I think, is what I'm saying, but see, then I would, maybe, because white, but, like, to me, like, the character of Spot didn't seem white to me, because you couldn't tell, they didn't show what he looked like before, and then if you go and watch into, you can't really tell, like, blink and you miss it, it appears white appearing, you know. Do they show a clip of his face? It could have been, like, an Asian man maybe, but, like, okay, let's say he's a white guy with, like, black hair and, like, a black goatee, like, kind of tall, I think. But beyond that, just, they were saying, like, the characteristics of what he acted like is, like, with that white male privilege of, like, I'm entitled to these things. I'm entitled to these things. I need this. I need this. I need to be back on top again. And yeah, like, I'm not saying that Spot should have become a villain and, like, justifying the villain's behavior. I'm saying, like, what if Spot was met with compassion instead? If someone had said, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a freak. It's society treating you poorly. Or then when he met Miles, he was really, really down on his luck, and Miles wasn't even giving him the time of day. Miles was looking at his phone. Miles wasn't paying attention, and kind of, like, kicking a man when he was down thing. Now, Spot shouldn't have mapped all his rage and anger directly onto Miles and shouldn't have become a supervillain, but that's kind of where I go with suspension of disbelief. But, like, but that does, am I giving a white man a pass then? I'm like, that's not what I mean to say. But it's like, I feel like, you know, I can see why Spot would be upset. But it's like, if you're in a spot where you're, like, on your last leg and you're at your bottom dollar and you're panhandling, scraping for a buck to like go try to, get you, and you're really down, and like somebody like comes up and like mocks you or something. I don't think you would latch on to just that person. And if it was an innocent bystander, kind of in which Miles was, yeah, that would be totally uncalled for. You don't take your rage out on an innocent bystander. You take your rage out at the world, And again, you could see where he maps onto Miles, and that Miles isn't a complete stranger just making fun of him, but Miles, like, was there prior. But again, that's the same kind of behavior of, like, say, a customer who like walks into a store, and if they have a problem with a store, they yell at the cashier. The cashier isn't the store. The cashier isn't related to the policies of the store, but the customer incorrectly and wrongly maps onto the cashier as like the face of the company. That's the person they see. That's the human element that they put to this oblique and intangible construct of their rage against the system. And so, again, in that way, yeah, Spot is a Karen or whatever, if you will. Yeah, in that way of mapping onto Miles, who's an innocent bystander who just was there, and focusing rage there when it should have been focused, like I said, specifically on Kingpin or on himself for working for Kingpin prior to said accident, like I said, and he was unwilling to do that self-reflection of thinking about his life choices to be working for Kingpin and taking his rage out on Kingpin. But then post-accident, you could also be mad at the world for his systemic discrimination and policies that don't hire people that look like him, and maybe they should have a equivalent of a Equality Rights Act passed in that society. So that's kind of my feelings with the Spot character there. So I think that kind of encapsulates a whole lot. Yeah, I just wanted to dig into deeper of trying to absorb other thoughts that people and other voices that are contributing to the discussion of the movie, and having these discussions about identity and policing and oppression, and how do we interact with systems of oppression, of do we join it and try to fight it from within? Do we go all punk rock and just completely resist every element of it? Do we try to work out some complicated thing in between? Do we participate in, do we think we're participating in systems that we like while rejecting other systems that we don't like? And at the end of the day, if we don't live in a world of anarchy and we do live in a system that is built upon systems of oppression, then how do we interact with those systems where, in the best way possible, we can create a society where anyone, no matter of their ability, status, or gender, or orientation, or race, or religion, that anybody can be a superhero, that anybody can exist within the society on equal footing and equal measure with true authentic representation and such. And this movie is touching directly on a lot of those themes and the roles that we are told to play in society, and who's boxing us in to what boxes, and then how do we knock those boxes down and rewrite the story and do our own thing and be a more inclusive society. So yeah, lots of thoughts, and I guess I'm just going to end that there. So yeah, okay, everybody be kind to each other out there.